Good morning to you.
Morning. Good morning. Not quite Dalgety Bay. That's a bit further south.
Oh, is
But
it? I thought.
yeah, it's
Oh,
St. Fife.
really? Oh, where have I got that? Has somebody got that wrong on your
Broughty Ferry.
on your Broughty Ferry? Sorry, Broughty
No,
Ferry. Oh
lovely
no,
Broughty. No, no,
what a
no, no.
mistake to make. Why have I got that wrong in my head? Well, you see, my defense is that I'm from the West Coast and that's East Coast, and that's
Exactly.
all. Yeah, that'll do.
You know, and I'll jump in. I'm a proper East Coaster, so I get my Weems bays and all sorts of things, and we're Nunes, all that kind of thing mixed up. So lovely as they all are.
Yes, yes, all of it is lovely. It's just far away. That's all. That's all. Thank you very much for making the time to talk to me this morning. MPs hard at it since, well, I was going to say July, but actually you had an election campaign to go through. So June, and coming up to Christmas, your first chance to stop and do something that all of us love, which is read some books. So very simple question: what are you going to be reading this Christmas?
So I've got a few things. I love history books and I do like a bit of non-fiction. So the first thing I want to highlight is selfishly a book I wrote the foreword to, but there's the book of poetry by a guy called Jim McIntosh, who's a Perth-based poet. We Are Migrant, and it's his reflections on the human experience of migration and refugees, and why I think that's quite important for us as policymakers. But everybody is. We read about these things, we talk about them at a policy level, and that's fine. That's absolutely correct. But sometimes will you lose the human element of it? And he's captured all these different human stories in this book of poetry. So I don't even read that much poetry, but I love that. I absolutely love it. And apart from that, I always try and get into a little bit of history. I think I'm going to reread Tom De Waal's book on the Caucasus because that just seems very timely at at the moment as well, and closer to home, Murray Pittock's global history of the Scots is really good as well in terms of thinking about our role in the world and where we sit in the world.
Is that a sort of story of Scottish emigration, history of Scottish emigration then?
Well, Murray's book's not. It's about the global history of Scots. So and forgive me for putting my own plug in, when I wrote my own book on Scottish foreign policy, I always thought about what's our impact. And actually Murray's captured that really nicely. And what history tells us is it tells us about how we've landed where we've landed today. And it's just really interesting about the interactions and engagement that we had with our partners across Europe, because I think sometimes we think that the world as it is today is the world in the way it always has been. But of course, it hasn't always been like that. And Murray's book's just a really good way of giving us a slightly different perspective on how we ended up where we are. And also, in the new year, we're about to see a US president come to power who's half Scottish, whose mum's first language wasn't even English; it was Gaelic,
Yeah, indeed.
um, and the story of indeed the story of emigration and how we have influenced the world around us for good and sometimes for not so good.
There's a true story that Donald Trump's mother was in hospital in New York. She'd had a stroke, and the nurses thought she was really ill because she was speaking gibberish. And she was very lucky because she had an Irish nurse who realized that she was not speaking gibberish. She was, in fact, speaking Gaelic, which was her first language when she was little. So sometimes when I sit and listen to the soon to be again President Trump talking about migrants and all, I kind of think, well, it happened in your family too. You wouldn't be there if it
Yeah.
wasn't for that. Anyway,
And
so
actually, we're all migrants. There is none of us. You know,
yeah,
my family would have come from Ireland or even further back from Norway or whatever. There's nobody in the world whose family were not once upon a time a migrant in one way or another.
yeah, yeah. Okay, so what books are you going to be giving this Christmas? Have you thought about that? What books would you like to give to people?
Yeah, so I'm going to give. Still need to go out shopping for some of these things. So I don't know when this is going to come out. So some people are going to think I'm very last minute, and they'd be right to think that as well.
Mm.
I think looking at a book because I'm down at Westminster, spend a bit of time in London. I think I might give a book to my wife on London, but but also the Book of Monroes, because one of the things that we like to do when we get rid of the children is to try and do a Monroe. So we'll get a Book of Monroe so that we can keep up the momentum on that. I'll be giving my dad the Strategists by my colleague at St Andrews, Professor O'Brien, which is looking back at the strategists of the Second World War, but actually that informs us about where we are just now. Do you see there's a theme I do enjoy, but actually, finally, I think I'm going to give my wee boy Tolkien's The Hobbit, because he's getting to an age whereby he watched a tiny bit of the film, and I'm never keen on people watching the film before they read the book, but he's 7, so I'm going to cut him a wee bit of slack. But I think I remember reading The Hobbit with my granny and loving it, and I think he'll enjoy it just to get, and that first experience of reading a really proper book with a diversity of characters. So I'd like to at least give it a shot.
Oh, lovely. And just to go back to the East Coast, my wife always remembers sitting in a caravan in St Andrews on her holidays with her dad reading The Hobbit to her many, many, many years ago. So,
It's
yeah.
lovely. Do you know what? That's so lovely, and it's such a nice book. And do you know what? We always think back of these things with fond memories, and your wife probably does as well. What we don't remember is the poor parent having to go through the hassle of reading a slightly longer book without pictures in it and getting shouted at because they want to. So we always look back on these things fondly, but it's the fight to get them to concentrate for a few minutes. So I'm looking forward to that a little bit less.
Brilliant. Books set in Scotland that you would recommend for our readers? I mean, we've got loads of crime. We've got crime books coming out our ears, haven't
I
we?
mean,
So,
yeah, Val McDermott is is
yes.
is is wonderful. There's actually there's a new book that's just come out about Broughty Ferry, and it would be utterly remiss of me not to mention that as well. That talks about the history of Broughty Ferry. So I think that's one that's based in Scotland. That's one that's been written by some Broughty Ferry residents. Callum Webster talked about a book in Tales of Broughty Ferry, and I think sometimes when we talk about things that are based, we think about the very localized history of what's going on around us. But I also like Lewis Grassic Gibbon
Yeah.
as well. So that's just excellent. And actually, I remember my wife's from the south of England, and I gave her years ago as a book Kidnapped to read, because I think it's an old one but a good one, because Robert Louis Stevenson writes so beautifully and so easily.
Mm.
Um, I think it was absolutely excellent, and it was a good way to start to get to know the country a wee bit as well.
Yeah, and in Kidnapped, you get a lot of swash for your buckle, don't you, really?
You get a
It's all
lot. It's a good old fashioned swash for your buckle, and it's the sort of thing if you're on your holidays, you can hammer through in a day or two as well.
brilliant. And we're allowing everybody to just do one more thing. Recommend either a film or a TV program that you think people should have a look at or that
Always
you'd
adore
want to watch.
do you know when it's cold and you're sitting at home and you've been going to work, and it's a bit like that. We're getting to the end of the parliamentary term as we're going to recess, and everybody's worked hard this year, I think, in public services, but also in Parliament. We've had an election. I like getting taken away with them. I still love David Lean's Lawrence of Arabia, because if you watch it on a big enough
Ah,
telly, you can disappear into the
wow.
sands of Arabia for well, I say a couple of hours, 3 hours.
Yeah. And have you ever been down to Dorset, to Bovington, to the tank
I've
place that
not. I'd love.
well, you should.
I've not
You
been to
really,
Dorset.
really, you should. You should. If that's your film, then you really need to go there and find out a bit more about Lawrence down there at the museum. Brilliant. Thank you so much. I'm definitely going to go away and have a look at some of those, not just for me, but for presents for other people. Definitely like the idea of the strategists. I know a history teacher, well, a former alumni of St Andrews who will want to know about that one. So Stephen, thank you very, very much for persevering with us and giving us your recommendations. And we will pass
Having
them on
me
to our
on.
book club members. Have a very, very happy Christmas, and more to the point, have a very good New Year.
Thank you. Happy Christmas, Happy New Year, and thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you. Bye.